Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics to set up week 3 of the OUA season. Tom, we've been blessed with 2 fantastic weeks so far to set things up. You and me, actually, I don't even know if I confirmed this with you, are catching a double header of football
Yeah.
live this coming week that we'll tell you all about it and some other fun things, news that we have coming your way. But none of that matters unless I ask you first, Tom. How the heck are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm always doing so well. It's always doing well. We're talking OUA football. I get to talk to my favorite person in the world to talk OUA football with. I've always got a big smile on my face.
You've just confirmed in my books that Erica does not listen to our podcast, or you'd be in the doghouse
She
big
certainly
time.
doesn't talk about OUA football with me.
If you don't talk OUA football, don't talk to me. We're certainly going to talk OUA football as we always do, but we have some exciting news. Friend of the show and former Laurier Golden Hawk, Alfred Green, who runs the Instagram page, and I don't know the full expanse of what his platform does. I'm very much not online. Call me an old man, call me a caveman, even. Had a post recently that was apropos and timely to some things that we've been cooking up. And though there's still a few moving pieces that we're going to confirm, we just got off an exciting phone call, Tom, and we just gotta share this. So, Tom, first off, that post and everything like that, and then what on earth are we cooking up in the lab?
Yeah, good friend Alfred Green. Shout out House of CFL. Please go give them a follow. They do fantastic work. But he put out a post saying, hey, wouldn't it be so nice if U Sports was doing all these things, including a U Sports game day live? I am very excited to tell all of you that Zach and I will be live on location to do an OUA game day live at the University of Guelph for what we're dubbing as at the 55 Bowl, September 14th, Guelph against McMaster. We will be there live and direct, covering all of the games, just how we've always dreamed. I can't believe it's happening.
If you haven't been to a Guelph game, they do the tailgate pregame perhaps better than any other school in the province. And though we've not made it out of the province to check out games, I'll say pleasantly surprised to know if other schools were doing it better. And hey, that'd be great if they were. And we're going to be right there in the parking lot setting up the matchup of, again, what was formerly known by many as the Battle of Highway 6. Great name. And you know what? I'm sure it'll still live on in some ways. But again, if you don't know, then you must have just started tuning in. Tom, you played for those Marauders and I played for Guelph. Yeah, you can see it in the background there. And yeah, the At the 55 Bowl. Really excited about this. Again, it's essentially going to be our preview pod, potential of some special guests. We won't say it right now because I'm not entirely sure if it's announced, but there's some special events that are announcements on the Guelph side of things that are happening that day that'll be concurring with our being there. And it's just going to be a fantastic day. Yeah, it's again, yeah, we saw that post. It was too timely. We've talked about it in parts, but here we go. We're making it happen.
It's happening. I can't believe that it's happening. We'll have more information out to everybody across also our social medias as soon as we know the exact details. But like Zach mentioned, we just got off the phone with the University of Guelph. Shout out Griffin Football. You are truly incredible. And that we finally confirmed this is happening. So pay attention to our social medias. If you don't follow us already, at the 55 podcast on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all of that. And we'll get out all of that information in the coming weeks. But my goodness, we could not be more excited.
Christmas cometh early for us, my friend. Of course, we wouldn't be able to make it happen without the help of our friends at Royal Media. If you want even a snippet of the great things that they do, check out the amazing content they were capturing with Tom at Waterloo for East West and all the amazing things they do in their own field and outside of the sports world. So that's going to be stellar. Super pumped for that. But, we're talking Guelph Griffin football. They got a little stop to the KW before they return home for the At the 55 Bowl. We're talking Guelph. We're talking Laurier to kick off week 3. Tom, Laurier coming off the bye after that hard fought victory they picked up at Ron Joy Stadium in week one. Guelph coming off a really strong outing here in the six at Varsity Stadium, where they put up, what was it, 48 in total on the U of T Blues. And again, despite a few lulls in the middle of that game, this is a team where they seemingly are firing on all cylinders. What's your reading on this one off the jump?
I can't believe we have such an outstanding matchup just 3 weeks into the season here. Watching these two clubs go at it is going to be absolutely incredible. Looking at these guys just based off of what we've seen so far, we know that Laurier has the capabilities on offense to really explode. Taylor Elgersma, there's a reason why he was the OUA MVP. There's a reason why we can't shut up about the guy. He is a stud in every sense of the word, and he can burn you at a drop of a hat, certainly. With all of the receivers that he's got, with the O-line that's pretty solid, that offense is very dangerous.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah.
when you look over at the Griffins and you look at that offense and that all O-line and that run game, and you start thinking, oh, dang, they did a bunch of work against a solid U of T squad and did not have their two starting running backs while doing it. This is going to be an outstanding offensive showcase. I can feel it.
What's so nice, Tom, as well, as we get into the middle of the season, or we're kind of on the cusp of that part, is we can start to now do that cross analyzation of what we've seen from these teams against common opponents to start to discern a little bit more than we might have had. And, I'm thinking as well, you mentioned that outing. We both mentioned that outing Guelph had at Toronto. And of course, worth noting, they start off the season dropping 38 on a Carleton team, a really good Carleton team in our estimations, that then, sticking with Carleton, returned home to shut out Windsor for a half of football, holding them to only 18 points. So we get to start playing that game a little bit. And what's more, you brought up the run game, worth noting. And again, Queens perhaps has one of the best run stopping defenses in the nation. But a team in MAC where they get Braden Kelly rushing for 101 in that game against Laurier. And we talked about still a really strong defense for Laurier, but they had some major losses at every level of that defense. And they got some great additions as well. Shout out to our guy Harner Dollywall. Absolutely. Oh, yeah. But you talk about this this Guelph run game, talk about them with maybe the best O-line in the league right now in the OUA. Mm-hmm. I think that's certainly a topic we can debate about a little bit. And you said without their two starting running backs, I feel like there's reason to believe from some of the conversations we had going back to our day at Guelph that we might be seeing, we obviously saw Donovan Malloy against Carleton, that this may be the moment that they're waiting to take Isaiah Smith off ice. And when you add those things together, because I'm certainly still very cognizant of the fact that Laurier came to Guelph and dropped 60 on our ass last year. Actually, no, it wasn't our ass last year. Sorry, why am I swearing? It wasn't on us last year. They were still them last year. Now they're my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everyone's Guelph Griffins. Super cognizant of that. But when you look at the perhaps the addition of Donovan Malloy, who didn't play against U of T, where and also this kid Caleb Sargent, looking like one of the shiftiest backs to ever set foot in the OUA, and then maybe getting Canadian Saquon Barkley stepping back on the field for the Guelph Griffins behind that O-line with a Laurier team where, again, they're coming off their bye, and that's maybe good. But again, this is a Guelph team that had a great opener at Carleton, a great opener at home against Carleton, went on the road to take out U of T. They're hot. They're on, like, they are consistently staying with the mojo that they've been crafting. Laurier, tight battle in MAC, and we saw some positive things. They can work on some things for sure in that bye week, get rested. But again, you're coming off of your break. The rest's not key there, right? You want to be tested. You want to go into battle and do... My God, Tom, I'm talking a lot of Guelph right here, right now. Why don't you take the wheel a little bit and, I don't know. You speak.
It's something to be noted, certainly, that any bye week that happens, in my opinion, before week 4 is not a true adamant positive to the team that's on the bye. If you get 3 games under your belt, maybe 2, but I'd still say 3 games under your belt, and then you get a bye, I think that's a great time for you to take a rest, reset, reevaluate everything that you've been going through, and then go into your next opponent and really have that as an extra bit. To have a bye week in week 2, especially for a squad like Laurier that is so veteran, that really knows their stuff, they would highly benefit from having that in like week 5, week 6, to give their body a bit of a rest before getting back into things. So to have that a week 2, I don't even really, like you mentioned, I don't assess that as a positive for Laurier going into this as much as I would later on. Now, still having that offense, Taylor Elgersma, Chisenham and Sydenham, Gregorcic, all of those guys be solely focused on Guelph for 2 weeks, especially with the bad blood that Mr. Elgersma told us about last
Ah,
year.
true.
That's something else that's really going to add into this. It's not just another team, it's the Guelph Griffins. This is a highly tested matchup for sure. So I am really interested to see how teams come out. I still think I completely agree with you that Guelph offensive line, I would say right now is the best O line in the OUA. We could probably put them up against anybody else across the country. They're operating at a very high level. We saw a bunch of blitz packages from Carleton and Toronto, and they were able to pick them up for the most part very solidly across the board. I like the players there with both of those Guelph running backs. My goodness, that ground game is going to be outstanding no matter what. And especially when looking on the other side, when we looked at Laurier losing guys like Brubaker, like Onyemene, like those core guys in the front 7, that could spell some disaster very quickly. However, Laurier didn't make it to the Yates Cup for no damn reason. These are damn good players. They're rested. They're focused on Guelph. I think this is going to be a real good game, despite how high we are on Guelph.
Totally. And, again, Guelph seemingly firing on all cylinders. That defense is looking really strong. Obviously, in the last few years, if we're going to look at some of the holes on that team, that run defense has been susceptible as far as ways that teams have attacked them. I mean, obviously, when the 60 piece that Taylor dropped on their head, Taylor's version, if you will, that was, again, as we talked about, just like he was running Skelly all day. Again, now that we can kind of think about games and how they all worked out and things like that, you had Matthew Moore in week 1 for Carleton rush for 114 yards against Guelph, so that defense, again, that might still be the area you can have success. And while, of course, it was notable when we learned that Quentin Scott wasn't going to be playing for these Laurier Golden Hawks this year, which stinks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Tanner Nelms is an absolute beast. And again, we were really impressed with that young guy and Tayshawn Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And, but even more so for a young guy getting those live bullet reps in a game, I think matter a lot. But again, I'll be so fascinated to see where Laurier looks to attack Guelph on defense. And I guess one of the last things I want to throw your way, because you brought to my attention, was how Guelph defensively was using a lot of substitution packages when they wanted to seemingly go into different coverages and into different looks against the defense and against the opposing offense. And when you have a guy like Anthony Mortuzo in that sort of linebacking secondary core with the versatility he brings, Barigo and McDougal as well in that linebacking core, all the beasts we know they have on the front line. How do you see, and maybe it's just like, we'll wait and see, but again, from that standpoint, like, do you see Guelph perhaps trying to throw some different looks at Laurier? They're sitting there, as you said, an extra week of prep going against Guelph. Guelph already maybe like resting 2 of their star running backs to not give you the full look of that offense. Defensively, again, do you think there are things that maybe Guelph is holding back on, or are they just going to say, look, we're just going to hope that, our best can beat your best?
It's very interesting to think about this because, in my opinion, you can get away with not showing everything up until about week 3. In week
Mm,
3, typically you've played some really great teams or you've had a lot of variety against different fronts. that require you to showcase everything you have. I think with this game, there's a lot of stuff that we have not seen from Guelph yet that we will see. Don't forget, star linebacker, well, maybe I shouldn't say star, but certainly somebody to watch in Javon Jacobson, who we only saw for 1 or 2 games last year, has not played as of yet. I haven't heard any injury reports. He might be out, certainly, so that could be the case. Anthony Mortuzo hasn't been as prominent, even though in that pass concept of a defense, he still plays a very prominent role. I wouldn't be surprised if they really try to showcase some stuff. We've seen a bit of a trend across the league so far as well. York has tried to do it. I think Mac did it a little bit. Queens, a bunch of teams have started doing this hurry up offense to try and limit the substitutions that the defense is able to do. I would very much suspect that Laurier is going to do the same thing, especially after watching that U of T game and seeing 4 or 5 guys sub in and sub out on first and second down for Guelph. So I wouldn't be surprised if we now see a package with Mr. Mortuzo a little bit more in that base defense in order to make sure that they're covering things off. And certainly against a team like Laurier, where that passing attack is so prominent and so deadly at any point, not just in ideal situations. I think Guelph has got a few more tricks up their sleeve that they have not shown yet. Some players, some fronts, some formations, or plays in general. And I think all of that is going to come to show this week against Laurier.
And I think something that goes with that really nicely, we talked about with this being Coach Saria's first year as the head coach, that given, you look at the last few years for Guelph, I think it's fair to put the expectation that you should be a team that makes the playoffs this year, or like, unless, injuries always being a thing, which have plagued Guelph over the last couple of years, you recognize that. But that as the offensive coordinator, as someone who it gets touted by others with similar terminology, the way that people talk about your guy Greg Knox doing his thing at York, the mad scientist of sorts, where if there's one thing we've seen, and we talk about him getting more weapons going into this week offensively, of course, is we've seen the multitude of ways that this team can attack you with the 2 quarterback looks, with a wealth of skill position players. We're seeing, whether it's Jacob Thomas, we still haven't really seen, still waiting on the Vashon Janusis game to happen. And of course, with Isaiah Smith, with Donovan Malloy, this kid Sargent, all these types of guys where you talk about whether all the rabbits are out of the hats, whether we're at page 50% of the playbook, wherever we're at. Like, again, I still think there's potential for this Guelph offense to start showing us things that we haven't even dreamed of, right? Again, with the amount of when you and it starts up front, right? And I think that was the model we used to use. It starts with us, right? Where you have that security that you can seemingly run anything from that standpoint. It's not a situation where you say, maybe we're a little light in the ass up front. Maybe we have to do these things, or you know what? We have more just heavy, big bodies. We can't do as much of the outside zone stuff where we don't have any true pullers or whatever it is. That offensive line can do it all, right? And it goes back to how heavily we're supporting what they've been doing, and for the right reasons. Watch them play. Again, that has me really excited. But I'm also terrified at the prospect that, again, a rested Laurier team that, again, probably still holds the grudge over that bit of bad blood that was spilled last year, is going to look to kick these, put Guelph in their place, that maybe these Guelph Griffins are getting a little high and mighty, perhaps partly due to our own doing, but they're being like, as you said, we weren't in that Yates Cup by accident. We didn't have the OUA MVP at quarterback for nothing, and we didn't return darn near our whole offense for people to start picking teams to come into our house on the road and push us around. But Tom, that's exactly what I'm doing. Give me Guelph on the road, baby. Let's go. Let's go. Time for a little get back. Time for a little get back. Put on your James Brown Guelph on the bus right there. Little payback, little get back. Let's go, man. Falls to Galley, to Elgersma, Papa Elgersma, all y'all. I'm sorry. I love y'all so much. Come on. Give me Guelph on the road.
Taking the Griffins on the road in Waterloo. My God, you are so back on Guelph.
You know what the worst part is we're gonna be in the stands. So if this blows up in my face, I'm just gonna be the Homer Simpson meme where I just disappear into the bushes like I'm doing on my virtual screen right now. Um, Tom, I didn't mean to cut off the commentary. If we still want to go back and forth, the transition into that pick just felt too tantalizing for me not to take it right there. Whether you're
uh,
going into your pick or want to talk more about it, I'm open for all of it. Oh,
Outstanding. And I completely see where you're coming from. I think there's so much potential with this Griffin squad. I think that defense has not shown everything that they truly can, neither with that offense. I think they're going to surprise Laurier with a bunch of stuff, but Laurier is still golden. I think the Laurier Golden Hawks, and what I will say is that might be a bit controversial, and I am picking Laurier to win this game. I think Guelph rushes for over 200 yards.
let's
I
go.
really think that run game is going to do some great things. Isaiah Smith is most likely going to be back, Donovan Malloy, and I think Tristan Aboud and Marshall McCray in particular are going to take off and run and do some great things. I know we've talked about the possibility and the potential of that Griffin passing game. I don't think it's there yet. I don't think that they're there yet to beat the great and elite teams so far. I think they can certainly get there. I don't think it's yet. And I don't think without a solid passing game that you can beat a team like Laurier. I think Taylor Elgersma flexes his muscles, and this is a damn close game, but Laurier comes away with this one.
Oh, I can't wait to be sitting with you there in Waterloo and just seeing what breaks out. No matter how it goes down, I would be just shocked if we got an outcome in either direction the way we did last year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, going from 1 o'clock game in Waterloo to another 1 o'clock game in Waterloo, the Ottawa GGs travel from the nation's capital to take on the Waterloo Warriors. Tom, both of these clubs coming off of sort of different directions, but both with a bit of a stink on it. Ottawa, we saw live from York, where, as we talked about, and a lot of people have highlighted, there was a lot of promise with this York team. A lot of those question marks weren't fully answered per se with Dexter Janke, with the West Shore Rebels, with the new offense, with the new defense, and all these types of things, but a lot of good things. Again, that whole winning isn't everything mentality. You're making the right moves, the progress over, or the process over the product type thing for right now. And again, it took Ottawa really into the second half to get something going offensively. That defense was there for them. And you know what? Again, we talked about sort of coaching philosophies, locker room talk on the last episode. We don't need to go over that all over again. I'm curious what the philosophy was. Ben Miracle's first game back, and he certainly struggled in that game at times due to what York was doing, and at times, hey, first time against live bullets. For Waterloo, arguably, it's funny what was that final score? They lose 71-3 at Western. And in some ways, like that's off. Like that stinks. In some ways though, Tom, is it easier? Like, is Waterloo oddly in a somewhat better position bouncing off of that loss where you can just say, what the heck do you want to say about it, guys? Those are the 3-time Yates Cup champions. It's the Western Mustangs. We went in their house. That place was packed. Not that you accept that. Not that you accept it, but that mentality of like, well, what the heck are we going to do? Just like go cry about it and quit? No, you don't do that. And just to be able to say, look, do you even watch that tape? I mean, they do obviously, but just on to Ottawa type mentality. For Ottawa, being the team that's favored going into York, for a team that, again, we talk about all these elements, the return of Ben Miracle, how good they're looking with Charles Asselin in the backfield, some of those weapons that whether it's Miracle or Jansen has in the passing game. And again, with a sturdy defense, especially in that back end, for a team in York that, again, looking like they're on the right trajectory, you go into their house and people are like, goodness gracious me, oh my, what on earth is going on here? Is that stink a little harder to wash off going into this one? And again, with Coach Belfait, I have all the trust in the world. Like this, talk about a buttoned up, a professional organization. I say this somewhat tongue in cheek, but do you kind of get what I'm saying? Where with Waterloo, it's almost easier to walk away from that loss at Western and just be like, whatever, not whatever, but then for Ottawa, a tighter win than you might have expected at York, and maybe that's still in the back of your mind a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of what you're saying, but I'm thinking about it in a slightly different way.
Let's go.
So what I'm thinking is that this Waterloo squad is going to be pissed off. Certainly, there's one defensive coordinator who just made the switch from purple to put on the black and gold, who's probably pretty pissed off at the result of that game. I think that, like you said, I don't know if they really dove into everything in there. They very well might have, but they're certainly picking out key things to say this is why things went as wrong as they did. We need to change this up. We need to evaluate this. And they're doing some serious soul searching over at the black and gold right now, most definitely. On the opposite side of things, the Ottawa GG's coming away with a victory against York for sure, but you've got a sour taste in your mouth because you left a lot of things on the field, missed passes, missed tackles, whatever you want to call it. There's no chance that this Ottawa GG squad that we know to be very competitive is happy with how they've played in the past 2 weeks. So coming into this, they're certainly going to be saying, you know what, we got to focus on us. We got to do this thing where we should take care of Waterloo really easily based off of what we saw previously against these two teams, all of this stuff. I think Waterloo, from a mentality standpoint, already has the edge here. I think going into this, they're going to say, we need to scratch, claw, kick, whatever we have to do in order to really put ourselves into positions to win here and say, we're never losing by 70 points again in this year. Let's focus up. Let's clean this up. Let's get ready to really go after Ottawa in our house. I think from a mentality standpoint, very different from where these clubs are coming at for sure.
I like your breakdown of that. And, another thing that I think these two teams, though, share as far as how they're going to bounce back from those games that were less than ideal in their estimations is a tale of two teams, but a story of four quarterbacks. Because, again,
Mm.
going with Ottawa, Josh Jansen starts week one. We know Miracle was injured darn near all of last year. We see Miracle with the start against York. Doesn't look all that sharp. And again, we can do all the reading into it, like all the angles of like, and again, I don't love the idea of like, yeah, you give each of them a full game apiece, and Josh Jansen's there like, cool. So I got Western, and then he gets York, or is it just, hey, we also thought of that piece of maybe Miracles is still a little dinged up, and then you save him for York, and maybe then you say, hey, you know what? Look, obviously wasn't what we wanted, but he's still coming back. All that, and you just you say we're too good to just sort of try and make a major change, and we know that Ben, when he gets it right, is right. And with Waterloo, a club where it felt like pretty quickly last year they had settled on Nick Orr being the guy. And it felt like, especially with how effective that running game was with Anthony Miller, and then seeing the emergence of rookie Quentin Springer, that you know what? Or your job right now is to hand that ball off, take a shot to your Evan Basiligas of the world, your Justin Sukars. Salute to you wherever you're at, doing whatever you're doing post OUA career, and some of the other guys in that skill position group. And then we watch that UFT game, and it looks like, oh, you know what? They're they're taking, they're letting him rip. They're letting him off leash a little bit. They're letting him play with the big dogs, and he showed that he could make something happen. Then Western happens, and again, same thing with the Josh Jansen piece with Ottawa. How much do you make of that when you go up against the champs?
Mhm.
Champs, champs. And that piece of it, because we did see Nolan Caban enter that game against Western at one point, and that could have been for any number of reasons, like that. Just I don't have it in front of me exactly when he came in. A little garbage time, maybe, but it just felt like it. And we talk about this all the time that despite the Sheehan era where Guelph kept moving quarterbacks around. I know Tom don't. Well, I won't say his name too many times. Hopefully that's it. It's like Beetlejuice. Imagine if he appeared on the Zoom call. I said his name two more times. Go
Oh, good
Dinos.
gosh.
But aside from what Guelph's doing now, where it's like, yeah, what they have with Abood and McCray, it feels like they've figured that out. It seems like we've been in lockstep with that belief Still laughing about that stupid joke. Um, I, of the belief that we don't love it when you play around with your quarterback's confidence. And again, we weren't on the sideline. We haven't spoken to anyone from Waterloo. Whether again that could have been any number of reasons that Caban went into that one. But again, we have
Mhm.
four quarterbacks with these two teams who have very much shown different things over the last 2 years. And Miracle, of course, was injured for last year. The quarterback piece of this is huge for us.
Yeah, this is really going to answer a lot of questions, especially for Ottawa, for at least you and me here. Are they going into that Jansen, you get one game, Miracle, you get one game, or was it that Miracle was injured and that now he's back, he's our guy, we're moving forward with him? Because certainly it would be unfair to give Jansen Western, give Miracle York, and then to say, okay, if that's all we were basing it off of, then we're set here. I still believe that Ben Miracle is the guy. I think that Ottawa GGs are better when he's at the helm. I think Josh Jansen really has a lot of potential. I think he needs a little bit more time to really hit to that part. I think it's going to be Ben Miracle who gets there. And I think on the Waterloo side of things, it's going to be Nick Orr. I think that Nolan Caban certainly is going to be the backup there. I think getting him in against, even if it was the second stringers against the champs of the champs of the champs, is valuable playing time for him and is going to be valuable experience for him to get in there. So I'm not surprised that Caban was in there. I expect to see Miracle and or excuse me, going at it against each other. And I'm expecting to see a little bit something closer for Nick Orr to that U of T game than I am closer to Western. I think that he finds some rhythm here. I think that they do a little bit better, but let's not forget that you and I were talking, arguably, that Ottawa GG defensive secondary is the best in the OUA.
I'm certainly in agreement with that. And that to me brings up an interesting, well, just leads me to where I wanted to go, which is to say this is a Waterloo rushing attack that we were really bullish on last year. And we really pinpointed as that MAC game where teams started to pick it apart a little bit. And we've gone over all the reasons of that. But this is so far a rushing attack, and I'm trying to pull the number up in front of me as we're talking about it, but a rushing attack thus far that, and again, one of those games, you're dealing with Western, and again, that was just, that game was what it was. Like, what do? You move off it. But thus far, Waterloo, third least rushing yards per game at 102.5, right? But on the flip side, as we said, Ottawa, great in the back end, and we love our Riley Hildebrands and our Kevin Andersons on the front end of that defense, and what Daniel Briere in the linebacking core is seemingly kind of captaining that defense at middle linebacker. Again, as you said, whether it could be a Nick Orr that we saw in the Waterloo game, or pardon me, in the U of T game. He's back home, in Waterloo. That's where the U of T game was, of course. But maybe this is their opportunity to say, you know what? Maybe we need to go back to a little bit of that 2023 philosophy, and we're going to pound the rock. We're going to give you a few easy reads to have, or, get into whomever it is out there, your Tyrannies and whomever else, Basiliga and whatnot, and just keep that philosophy of we're going to pound the rock. We're going to attack this defense, that philosophy of let's just go where, again, not to say that it's a bad run defense, but just say, like, hey, look, when we're at our best, we run the ball. Like last year, again, there were times where they were the best rushing attack in the OUA. That like literally was a thing with all but one of the same offensive line, who then you'd imagine got better. Ever heard of Ethan Kalra? The same two running backs and a quarterback who's gotten better. Yeah, you lose a guy like Evan Basiliga, James Basiliga. You lose James, you still have Evan. You lose Justin Sukar and a few of those guys in the passing attack. But I think if you're Waterloo, that pissed off mentality, and of course we know Bertoya, that of course to his core he is an offensive lineman. And as an offensive lineman, you know he wants to pound the rock. So there's part of me that just says that they're going to go in this game just with an absolute like FU mentality and just a live by the sword, die by the sword, maybe dial it back a bit more for Nick Orr and recognize that, you know what, we'll give him more opportunistic times instead of trying to throw him to the Lions, which is this Ottawa secondary.
Yeah, I think that Waterloo is certainly going to come out here and be the most aggressive that I think they have been. I think it's time for them to really try to establish themselves with some confidence, even if it means that you don't end up winning this game. I I don't think that it would be very bad, very obviously, if you had another version of this Western game, which, to be very clear, I do not think is going to happen for Waterloo. I think the champs flex their muscles a little bit, and that's what happened here. But I think Waterloo is going to come to play. I really do. Now, looking at the Ottawa side of things, we certainly want to see more from Ben Miracle. I know that we can see more from him. He's got the potential for it. We are very high on his capabilities, certainly. I think to get him going once again, you get Charles Aslan the ball and you get him that ball however you possibly can, whether it's as a running back, whether it's leaking out, whether it's as a slot, whatever that means. I think he's your focal point for this Ottawa offense. We saw that in the York game this past week very clearly. I was expecting to see a little bit more of Suleiman Kamara. I don't know if there's an injury or what, but we saw very not a lot of him and a lot of Charles Aslan in that running back position. I think that you go to that well as often as you possibly can. You get this kid going, you get him excited and fired up. And if you can start getting Ben Miracle to do a little dump pass over to the running back, gain some confidence, gain some experience. Hey, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. You do that, you get the Waterloo defense up a little bit more to try to stop Aslan, and then over the top to Malafont, who's got the wheels to torch any DB in the country here. I really think that that's the recipe here for this Ottawa GG offense to really get going. You don't have Gendron. That passing game is not there yet, and I don't think it has to be okay. We're not going to run the ball anymore. We're just going to pass as often as we can to get this going. I think you lean on Aslan, you get him going because he's going to no matter what, and that opens up everything for you here. Take the pressure off of Ben Miracle, put it on to Charles Aslan. So far as we've seen, he can handle it. Give that boy the rock.
And as you saw live and direct from Warrior Field, Maxime Malafont knows how to put on a show in Waterloo. Tom, you know, I feel like we've set up both sides of these teams pretty nicely. Where are you going with this one?
As much as I think that Waterloo is going to come back into this, I'm going with the GGs. I'm rocking with Ben Miracle, Riley Hildebrand, and our guy in Charles Aslan. I think that they start to come together and they show, at bare minimum, flashes of that great team that we expect them to be. I think the GGs take this one.
I'm in agreement with you there as much as I think Waterloo is going to go to that philosophy of let's run the ball. If you're Ottawa, you might be sitting there thinking, I think they're going to try and run the ball. You have guys that you can man up with their receivers. And yeah, whether it's Evan Basiliga, Tyler Tierney, some of those guys that, you know what, you don't love keeping in just single man coverage or with a single high man coverage, whatever it is, too often. Like, again, like, do we need to go through all the names? Kevin Victome, the brothers Cumberbatch, who else am I missing here? Tolu Ahmed, our guy
Ferdinands.
Denny Ferdinand, right? You know, so it's like that's the when you have that type, you know, if they're not the best secondary, it's got to be Western, right? And again, when you can then just perhaps load in the box a little bit more, be a little more creative in your blitz packages, which we certainly saw Western do to the detriment of these Waterloo Warriors. Maybe there's something there for Ottawa to see and be like, huh, that's kind of fun. So I'm in agreement. I'm taking my Ottawa GGs on the road in this one. But much like yourself, looking to see a bounce back performance by both these teams and really want to see Waterloo get back to their running ways and kind of similar and almost with Ottawa, though it's like, yeah, I think Charles Asselin as your primary go-to can be the reason you win this game. You walk out being like, game ball goes to Charles Asselin. You know what? Still obviously need to invest that time in making sure that if it is big number 12 out there in Miracle, I got that right. Number 12, Jansen's 15. He's 12, right? I think I got that right. Correct.
Yes, he did. Yes, he
That
did.
you are saying the same way that with the Queen's Golden Gales approach last week, where you're saying Kasari can win this game, but also let's make sure Vrikan gets a little bit of that mojo going. And how about those Queen's Golden Gales? Because they're playing football this week. They're hosting the York Fighting Lions live from Richardson Stadium, 3 p.m. kickoff. Tom, this is an interesting game. You know, it's a Queens team who we dubbed that matchup with them and McMaster. Prime first and foremost, we dubbed it a must watch, which, yeah, it was a must watch, even if it left some people in tears. Sorry if I just called you out there, Tom. But a must, but also dubbed it as the tale of two halves. And partly that was to do with the fact that Kasari didn't look all that healthy in the second half of that game. On the flip side for York, we're still piecing together what this team's going to be. We like some of the things that are in place. We love everything we're seeing, hearing, and just the vibes picking up from what Coach Janke is putting in place there. You know, Matt Lynch showed some positive things. I think we talked about that offensive line looked improved, if only by virtue of the two guys in Enisu and Carrera going to East West, coming back, and everything of that nature. And of course, that defense with not only your guy, the mad scientist Greg Knox there, but a lot of these West Shore Rebels. And of course, shout out to our guy Cairo Barry.
Mhm.
What is your, you know, obviously in these locker rooms, their goal is to win the game. And like, you know, we want to rush for this and we want to give up this, whatever. What is the thing that, from the objective standpoint, if we can say that about ourselves, the the thing that, or things you want to see from these teams? Like, we're not going to sit here being like, oh, I want to see Queens rush it for 250 plus. We want to see, you know, York this, that, and the other. You know, it's a bit more like narrative piece. What are the things you want to see from these clubs? Where again, in Queens, at the end of the day, they got the job done. They went up big early in the first half on the back of that great and now healthier O line with the best running back arguably in the country. And again, for York, all those different things. Like, what are the things that, before we even talk about what the outcome of this game will be, that even if you didn't see the score, but we're just kind of watching snippets here and there, that you'd be like, you know what? Yeah, I like that from Queens. I like that from York.
Starting with the York Lions, I want to see production from this offense in particular. I think that Matt Lynn showed some signs of doing some good things. Obviously, finishing 16 for 28, 120 yards, no touchdowns, one pick is not exactly the stat line that you want here, but I want to see a little bit more from him. I think that the offense and the play calling that was done in there lends itself into seeing him succeed. I like what Coach Rick Walters is doing with this team so far. The big piece, very big piece with the York Lions that I want to see is a run game.
Mm.
We saw Matt Lynn be the top rusher, 7 attempts for 38 yards, and most of those are just him taking off because he sees a gap and he's able to do so. Malik Gagne Smith, 3 attempts for 10 yards. Melchus Alunga, 4 attempts for 3 yards.
Yeah, it's got to get up.
Melchus Alunga, we've seen him. We know the capabilities that that man has. I want to see him be more part of this offense. I want to see that York Lions O-line start really making sure that they can get some holes. Now, you couldn't ask for a larger task against arguably one of the best D lines that the OUA has to offer here. But certainly, if you want to take some pressure off your quarterback, Matt Lynn, you have to get Malik Gagne Smith and Melchus Alunga, especially Alunga, into this game and make them prominent here. Once again, when we talk about this, I think it's very easy for people to assume that, like, yeah, you need to be doing power football, pulling guard, pulling tackles, counter trade. Let's get into this. Let's run the ball. No, you just need to get Melchus Alunga and Malik Gagne Smith. You need to get them the ball. If that's a dump pass, if that's a swing pass, if that's a screenplay, whatever the case, we've seen, especially Alunga, we've seen what he can do when he's got space in front of him. We've seen that he can make people miss. I'd love to see that side of things get a little bit more going, get the running backs involved into this offense a little bit more. I loved what we saw from Cairo Barry, obviously, that, and the receivers that were there. The big thing that I forgot to call out on there that you pointed out in particular, I believe it was a screen pass or a swing pass. I think it was to either Avery Ford or Alfred Olay for York. and they rushed for about 13 or 14 yards afterwards. And I was watching the ball, and you called up, wow, look at Cairo Berry blocking here.
Yeah.
Proper form technique, hands inside, driving a defensive back off. As former offensive lineman, God, we love to see that. I want to see a little bit more of that from this offense. I think there's fight in these York Lions for the
Mhm.
first time in a long time, and I want to see more of it. Get a little bit more on page, get them involved.
Well, and yeah, so and we'll go to the Queen side because you said some great things there. I want to jump in about the York piece because at first there was part of my thinking of like I'm taking Queens at home against York, right? Like, so are you, Tom. Like, let's, again, and it's not like, this isn't being mean to York, right? Like, this is obviously just looking at like what it is, right? Where these teams are at. And so then my first thought again of thinking that progress over product, process over product, whatever however you want to frame it, winning doesn't matter mentality that we've dubbed for them. And of course, doesn't matter a darn thing what we think about it. It's what they think there. But again, I think if you're being honest, going to year one of clearly a rebuild, that you have to recognize that the success comes in a variety of ways. And so I say that in saying that when you talk about at first when you're talking about all those ways, getting a little creative to get the ball into Alunga's hands or Cairo Berry's hands, whomever that is, my first thought is yes, but as long as that's part of what your plan is as an offense, but then I think back to again the way, as you've already highlighted, that they're using the no huddle, they're using these multiple substitution packages, which at times was a little desiring a bit more, right? And they caught a couple penalties as a result, and no doubt they've been cleaning that up. And so in my mind, from what you were saying, I think that tracks with some of the things they're trying to do. And it's that classic money ball mentality of being like, look, if to your point, thing like, wow, run the dang ball, power football, all those types of things. And I've certainly fallen victim to that sometimes in my coaching mentality, of being like, no, 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 on paper, these plays work. That's great. That's not where we play it. Where that money ball mentality being like, if we try and play the Westerns and the Queens and the Guelphs and the Lauries of the world of being like body on a body, downhill runners, all these types of things, at least right now, it I don't think that's not where you're going to find success. And I think if that's the mentality they're adopting offensively, which I think we saw a few things in that game that might illuminate that that's the direction they're going with a bunch, as you said, a bunch of dogs out there looking to dirty up those tricolor jerseys. I think that tracks with what we're seeing with them offensively. So again, at first I was like, the creativity piece, I get it. If this is a situation where you're an underdog, but you know what? Maybe you're prime for the upset. Like again, could anything happen? Of course, but like no, that's not going to happen on this occasion. But I think that tracks with the way from what we saw in their game against Ottawa that it could align with for Queens. Do we how many carries do we see for Jared Kasari? Because when we go back to that game against McMaster, right? I don't have the numbers exactly in terms of what his first half was, but what was it? Was it 3, 4 touchdowns, like 100 plus on the ground, undoubtedly. And that production cuts off in the second half, looking like he's banged up, but 27 attempts in this game. Meanwhile, Alex Freakin again goes 9 for 17, 141 in the air, no touchdowns, one interception. And we kind of mentioned this. I think this was kind of my take. Give Kasari the ball, beat Mac. They're the boogeyman, don't like all these types of things. He kind of did play with your food when he came out of the game a little bit. But again, hey, I would trust Rican too. We've seen the talent, all those things. And then you say, hey, we got York coming into our place the following week. Let's get Rican going when we're facing a team that's perhaps a little less daunting, where we don't have to just say, Exhibit C, play Kasari ball. How do you think their philosophy is going to be offensively, knowing that Kasari's a little banged up? You're playing a team in York that, again, there's a lot of things that I think all these teams, it's probably hard to prep for this team from the standpoint of like, Matt Nesbitt certainly knows Greg Knox. He was on those O lines with me having to go up against him 10 years ago, whenever that was. But aside from that, as far as the players on the field, a little bit of a few questions that are still York being one game into the season haven't revealed themselves to us. What would your philosophy be offensively if your offense coordinator, Matt Nesbitt, planning for this game with a bit of a banged up Vrikin, pardon me, Kasari, and a Vrikin who hasn't had that game that makes you think, okay, you know what? This team has more potential than just like a semifinal out, best rushing team, great defense, and maybe they get into that Yates Cup again, but being like, oh my gosh, these guys are looking to play in that game they're hosting in late November.
The glaring, the glaring missing part of this Queens team is a consistent pass game. First and foremost, that's what it is. When you look at all of the other aspects of here, they've got a solid O line, especially a healthy O line, like we saw against McMaster. Jared Kasari is an OUA MVP favorite at this point. That defense, I think, looks really solid, anchored by dudes like Darian Newell, Silas Hubert, and middle linebacker Justin Pace, who's making his presence known. I love a lot of what I'm seeing from this Queens team, the defensive secondary with Ashton Miller-Melanson. Like, this is a solid program, but that passing game is not where it needs to be. In 2 games so far, against Windsor and against McMaster, Alex Vrikin in the Windsor game, 14 for 28, 187 yards, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions. And then against McMaster, 9 for 17, 141 yards, no touchdowns, 1 pick. Alex Vrikin, we know, is a top tier quality quarterback in the OUA and has so far thrown 1 touchdown and 5 interceptions in 2 games. That is not who we know this young man to be. If I'm Coach Nez, in that spot, I'm making sure that Vrikin has a good game. I'm not saying, here, Vrikin, you're throwing the ball 56 times in this game, but I'm making sure that I'm setting this young man up for success. I'm making sure that we're utilizing guys like Nico Cuomo, Nathan Falcone, and the rest of that solid receiving core, even if it's, as long as it's obviously good reads. But if you've got a one-on-one scenario with either Cuomo or Falcone, I throw the ball up to them. Let them come down with it. I think they're good enough to come down against most of the other DBs in the league. And I'd be leaning on, let's get Vrikin going here, especially with what we think we saw was an injured Kasari at the tail end of that McMaster game. I'd be shocked if we saw Kasari's attempts at rushing get above 20. I think that you want to load him back down, make sure that he's 100% and keeping an eye on that, while also turning your attention to where it should be, which is on that Golden Gale passing game. If that passing game is not there for the rest of the season, they do not get to where they want to go. And it would be a real shame because all of the other aspects of this Queens team look really good. So that's what I'm focusing on more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, like again, and not to throw shade at York, his team doesn't have a Robert Springer, an Ethan John, Johan Shimbalanga, Josh Cumber, right? That they're dealing with. And again, maybe we just don't know that guy because they have so many of these new guys. And this will be that week where again we're saying Queens picked up the dub at home, but we've uncovered another little tidbit with these York Lions.
Certainly, you can't say that York's defensive secondary was really tested by Ben Miracle last week because he really did not have a solid game. Yeah. So there's a lot of question marks still, but I still completely agree with what you're saying.
And by completely agree with what I'm saying, that includes Queens picking up the dub at home, of course, right?
That would be correct. Yes.
Anything left on this one, my friend?
Want to see Queens get back to form, certainly. I would not be surprised if you and I are coming out of this game going, yeah, Vrikin played pretty well. This offense is doing pretty good. But that York defense under Coach Foxy Noxy is looking real good. Saw blitzing like freaking crazy, like he's chopping down lumber. They're coming.
Well, we'll be tuning in for that one as we're wrapping up the action with the Guelph Laurier game because that one kicks off at 3:00. Going to our next game, Tom, for all the stuff I've talked about, schedules, again, another really good weekend of programming here because at 5:00 from London, Western hosts the Carleton Ravens, a game which I saw on some social media or other. Like Facebook is what I use predominantly, right? Like this is, I'm a 31-year-old boomer, Tom. Shout out to the Boomers, though. We love you, and we think you love us as well. Uh, where Western's honoring their U14 and U12 and U18 championship junior Mustangs team. So again, nice moment for this club going into the team. Part of what makes that I got to see firsthand London football writ large so impactful and makes its way all the way up to the Western Mustangs and to the London Beefeaters is with how minor football operates in that city. So just a great moment for them. Western obviously did the Western thing with bells and whistles on last week with Waterloo coming into their house. And a Carleton team where, when you lose on a field goal at the buzzer from the 54,
That
at the
doesn't sound right.
52,
No,
at
I don't
the
think so.
at the 55. Oh yeah, it says so.
55.
It says so right behind me. Literally, if you're tuning in via YouTube, thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. What was I talking about? You can't be leaving that game, especially given that you went into it being like, we lost our starting quarterback, who, as of the start of the season, prognosticators, ourselves, were looking at what he did the year before, looking at that receiving core of Kasim Ferdinand and friends, and saying, you know what, man, this is a great passing attack. You lose him and you say, man, oh man, for them to hold Windsor the way they did at
Mhm.
times, and specifically, as you highlighted, the way that they were holding them in the run game early on, and as we saw, Windsor broke through. They burst through that dam and picked up the win in dramatic fashion. Huge kudos to them. And again, we still don't know what Tristan's status is. So for all we know, he's back out there slinging it to his guys. It for them to go into London and pull up this upset, it takes at least Tristan being back there. What are the other things though that you would need to see, or that maybe we've seen that you're like, they have to do that again and they have to do that again? That I think, especially when we look at the way that their run game was effective against Guelph, I think you look at that, because we still have some questions about that Guelph run game, but I think you have to
Mhm.
say, hey, look, we ran the ball pretty well against Guelph. And if it is Elijah Barnes, that's another X factor that you have in there in terms of his athleticism. And even Zach George, if you want to mix it in with him,
Mhm.
Floridian coming down, following the footsteps of our guy, John Edouard, another Floridian playing some Carlton football, playing for the Argos. But let's not talk about the Argos of late. I'm done.
Yeah.
Whatever,
Tie
man.
cuts may suck, but we're 2-0 against the Argos.
I don't get it, man. I don't get it. Whatever. It's not whatever. It really hurts. But and then you say, hey, look. So you look at the run game from that game. You look at the defense from the Windsor game. And you also bake into the equation that, like, look, the weather wasn't great. And even if that was Tristan Lefebvre in there, we were talking about Kasim Fernandez dropping some balls, Hatchie Brown, Reddy, some of these guys, they didn't have like the performances that we were used to. That's going to bounce back. I think there are pieces that we've seen from this team and how they've been building where we can say, maybe you could piece something together. But I think I'd also believe that a little more if we didn't see what Western just did to Waterloo. Because again, prior to that game, we had seen teams take Western into the fourth quarter in some games, or at the least into the third quarter. That was, again, a very big statement game. Because again, I think we don't think Waterloo were just a bunch of schlubs. Like, that was a statement with gusto. But I'm gonna ask you the question anyways. What is the combination of things, which again, I'm going to assume you believe includes Tristan Lefebvre being back, that Carleton would have to do without playing the game of, well, I don't know, if Western all sleeps in and they miss the game, would involve them being able to pick up the upset on the road, the major upset on the road?
Well, it just so happens that the last time that the Carleton Ravens beat the Western Mustangs, it was in Ottawa, but I had a chance to watch the entire game as it happened because I think it worked out nicely where Mac was on a bye and we were playing either Carleton or Western. So the entire O line got together and we watched the game back when it was on TV. RIP.
For now.
The big thing that stuck out to me, the reason why they won, obviously there's a list of reasons. I think that was once again one of the Nate Bahar effects of him really doing his thing. I believe so. But the big thing that stuck out was the special teams.
Hmm.
Special teams played a massive factor into that. I believe there was a kick return touchdown and the punt return game was doing really, really great things, setting Carleton up in great field position. I think that is your key to a lot of this here. I think obviously Tristan Lefebvre being back and playing for these Carleton Ravens would be the best case scenario for them. But let's assume that that's not happening. Let's assume you're rolling with Elijah Barnes, who honestly has not looked all that bad, given that he's kind of been thrown into the fire here. I mean, his last game against a very good Windsor defense,
In the rain.
17 in the rain, 17 for 31, 208 yards, one touchdown, and 50 rushing yards on the ground. I liked some of the decisions that he made, certainly. I think he took a few hits that maybe he wouldn't have if he wasn't taking off and running as of much. But once again, it goes back to the same Taylor Elgersma conversation. If you take that away from Elijah Barnes, do you just take away who Elijah Barnes is? Regardless, I think that Elijah Barnes coming into this has shown some real great sense of the things that he's able to do. I think Matthew Morin has some capabilities. Now, certainly running into the teeth of that Windsor defense is never an easy thing. 16 attempts for 61 yards with a long of 10, just to give you an understanding of it is not easy to run against Windsor. I think looking into everything that Carleton has shown us so far, Onyeka needs to have a
Hmm.
game. He needs to get into the backfield, disrupt Evan and his passing showcase, which once again, we talked about it last year, but Eric Anderson and Ivy Onyeka, that's must see TV right there.
Absolutely.
I think you need to have the best game possible, certainly from your offense and from your defense, but you set the tone with your special teams. Having outstanding special team play to constantly set you up in good field position or to limit what Western is able to do is one of the keys that you would need to see for an upside in London.
And I think a name that goes along with that really nicely is a guy in Otman Braum, who
Mm-hmm.
like we see score points for this this Carleton team in when if he's able to pick off a ball, he's deadly because he does the same thing when he's returning punts and kicks. When that young man is in open space, all heck can break loose. And of course, we know what Kasim Ferdinand can do. I kind of called my shot saying Kasim was going to throw a wide receiver screen touchdown pass. I get a mulligan on that one because of the weather. All right. If I knew it was going to rain, I don't think I was going to be calling for a receiver touchdown pass or anything like that. So again, we know that they've shown some trickery with the dynamic play of Kasim and just how he can attack you in all aspects. But this is a darn good Western Mustangs team, Tom. You talked about obviously having to disrupt Evan, but again, that offensive line, we were, I think, a little harsh on them a bit last year. And again, in large part, with the exception of Eric, it was the function of not no longer having a guy in Zach Fry. Tune into Saskatchewan Roughriders games if you want to see him. Phil Grahovic, tune into Edmonton Elk games if you want to see him. And Elliot Beamer, just living the dream, doing whatever he's doing. I don't think he's playing CFL football, but a heck of a football player when he was at Western. That those are big shoes to fill. And we saw, Berwick and O'Neill really step up, and some other guys on that O line to give them the protection. Yeah, seeing Eric Anderson versus Ife Onyeka, that's so stellar that like I know we're gonna be probably en route from Laurier to the other game we're going to, which at this point, since we haven't announced it, it's going to be the UFT Mac game that we'll talk about shortly. Doubleheader football with my friend Tom, and all those weapons that they have. It again, this team looks a little too hot to handle right now at home, coming off that win, and to me, this is a real not to jump ahead too much, but this is a team where Western then goes to Laurier the following week. And, if we think about, again, a team where both of us are, a team in Laurier, we're thinking, opposite sides of who we think are coming out, but a game where we think is going to be really, really challenging, or like a really competitive game, I should say. If you're like Laurier, if you're then, Queens looking a little down the line in your schedule. You're looking at Mac, you're looking at U of T, you're looking at Windsor, where again, like what Western's doing right now is just seemingly rippling through the multiverse of OUA football right now. And that defense is looking good. Coach Grandy, what he's been doing with that special teams unit has been outstanding. I mean, it's obviously a tall task to say the least. Anytime any of these clubs plays Western, we know that's the case. I mean, I think there's more to talk about. I'll say it right now. I'm taking obviously Western at home in this one. Like, how can you not after what they showed? They literally were firing to perfection in every aspect of the game. Tom, if you're going to be realistic in saying, well, what if this doesn't happen? What if this doesn't happen without being like, what if Keon Edwards slips on a banana peel and fumbles and then, Carlton scoops and scores and that happens every time? Why are there so many banana peels on him? Who knows? Maybe they're playing Mario Kart. Maybe that's their halftime programming. It'd be better than some other schools' halftime programming, but enough of that. If you're going to be realistic, okay, so the Carlton piece of what do they need to do, the special teams angle. I love that from you. And again, looking at guys like Brom, looking at Ferdinand, and who knows, maybe Tristan's back, right? Like, I guess what I'm asking is, have we seen with this Western Mustangs team so far this year, they pick up a great win on the road against Ottawa and they do what they did against Waterloo. Thus far in 2024, is there a weakness? How do you begin to think here's where we have an advantage with them? Because at least with this game, and it's not that Carlton doesn't have terrific players, but if you say Onyeka's their best player, it's like great. Not that from an offensive line perspective, you can't really say we'll put Eric Anderson on him, but I don't think Onyeka is going to turn down the challenge of going against him, and he probably win a couple of those. But if he's your best player, which he's your best player, and arguably their best player plays in the position where he does battle with him, if that's a wash, like what are we talking about?
You start looking at this from a multitude of different angles. I believe it is supposed to rain in the London area on Saturday. So when you look at that, you go, okay, maybe that passing game that Evan is really known for, maybe that goes away. And then you're left with the Western run game led by Keon Edwards and Keanu Yazbek. I think if it's poor passing conditions, it hurts Carlton more than it does
Totally.
Western because Evan can just hand it off to those dudes and be perfectly fine with things. What I've really noticed here is that I actually think that this Western team, at least so far, has gotten better from last year. They lose a guy like Savon Magne Jones, and you can't replace that dude. He had such capabilities. Obviously, Lowers Bowers Kane is gone. There's a few missing pieces on both sides. But to see the dynamic play between Yazbek and between Keon Edwards, certainly in that Ottawa game in particular, to see now Evan come into his own against a Waterloo squad, which I'm sure people have a lot of questions or whatever on that defense, but still finished 18 for 23, 281 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. He's also one of 2 quarterbacks that has not thrown an interception yet this year in the OUA, and the other one is Ben Miracle, who's only had 1 game so far. I think that this Western squad is ponying up to be an
Woo!
even better version of what they were last year. And let's not forget that last year they were the 3-time Yates Cup champions. I think Western takes care of business. It's not quite a night game, but they're still calling it a whiteout. They're asking all of their fans to wear white.
Love that.
So that's going to be an incredible atmosphere. I hope for the sake of the fans and for the sake of the atmosphere of the stadium, the rain stays away to get more people into there. But Western comes away with this one and they flex their muscles in doing so.
And you know what? And obviously, I already mentioned I'm in lockstep with you there. Just to take a peek ahead for Carlton, and man, what a tough break with Tristan. And like, you lose on the road against Guelph. You have Windsor coming to your house, and you almost pull that one off with a backup quarterback in tow. You go into the den of the champs, and just down the line a little bit. This is a team that has to take on a MAC team that it's kind of been a bit Jekyll and Hyde at times. A York team that, by that point in the season will be interested to see what they've evolved into. Panda game, and then they finish with Laurier. And, I feel like we're saying with all these teams, like, man, they got a tough schedule, which is just like, it's a tough league. Like, but again, where, you know what? When you lose your quarterback in the first half of your first game, I mean, kind of a la Ottawa last year, um, like, again, I hope folks watching and tuning in to this Carleton Ravens season. And again, I'm not like leaving them like left for dead or anything like that by any means. It's way too early in the season to think about that with any of these clubs. But again, with the terrible break of that, and with again some of these clubs they still have to face, like Western and like Laurier, so on and so forth. It's like, I just hope, like, certainly, I know you and I will keep the perspective of just how this team's been tracking. But again, this could be a situation where a team goes from 4-4 to 3-5, whatever pans out this year. And it's like, I still like what they have in place. But that's a conversation for an exit meeting interview way down the line. For right now, we got one more game to talk about for week 3 of this OUA season, and that is the U of T Blues rolling into Ron Joyce Stadium for a true night game if the 5 o'clock one at Western isn't, to take on the McMaster Marauders. Tom, this is a U of T team that's won 2 in a row against Mac, 1 in their house, 1 in your house. The one in your house knocking you out of the playoffs 2 years ago. The one last year giving us pause to think, man, oh man, is Coach Mullen's defense like, they can get down with some of the best in the biz. So Mac team, there's 2 teams here that, again, we've seen some really positive things, and we've seen some moments against some of the top opponents in the league where, we've seen some of those weak spots for these clubs. Start off just with the general breakdown as far as from what we've seen with these clubs so far, both coming off of losses, both on the road. I don't, U of T was at home, never mind, but both coming off of losses. What are the things, because obviously only one of these teams can win, but both of them can improve regardless, that you want to see to be able to say, you know what, U of T, Guelph was doing this, or you weren't executing this well in that game, and Mac, same thing to you against Queens. But regardless of which one you lose in this coming game, because unless somehow it ends in a tie, we still want to be able to say there was progress made. Let's start with U of T, and then we'll end on McMaster a little bit more. What are the things that from when we saw the Waterloo game to Guelph that you want to see in the improvement in this one?
We talked about it in the review, certainly after the U of T Guelph game. In the blocking assignments, I know I already detailed this, but I want to see that U of T O-line shore up a little bit against those blitzes, especially those blitzes that were coming inside, meaning that the Mac or Will or Sam linebackers, whoever it were, are blitzing in between the tackles instead of sending pressure outside, where technically it should be easier to try to pick them up or to at least get them caught up in the mass of humanity that's already in there. I want to see this U of T team block and consistently block against a very good McMaster defense and give Caleb O'Donohue time to throw and to really do his stuff. I'm also really interested in seeing the progression of Coach Kanich's offense, certainly, but something that I saw a lot of in that Guelph game that I think we're going to see a little bit more of was there was a lot of wide receiver screens, getting the ball out to a guy like a Jake Oseen, getting the ball out to your other playmakers that are on the edge, and allowing your other receivers to block for them to gain some yardage. We saw some positives from that offense to go along with that in particular. And I'd certainly love to see that, to give Caleb O'Donohue a little bit more confidence, get him back to form, certainly to what we saw against Waterloo. Now, that's going to be a very tall task, because you and I both know that this McMaster defense, at least so far, has showcased the prominence that they are capable of in, at bare minimum, certain aspects of both games that we watched. So it's going to be a tough task, most definitely, but I want to see that offense come a little bit more into their own, get a little bit more back to what they showcased in Waterloo, and prove that that wasn't just a flash in the pan, that they're able to replicate this.
Yeah, I'm in alignment again with just first and foremost, just seeing how Coach Kanich's offense progresses and the similarity in facing two and now likely, well, not likely, a third aggressive defense, and
Mhm.
how we've seen what seems to be the approach that Coach Canisius has taken in terms of how he's wanted to attack that pressure. In, as you highlighted, in the game against Guelph, where those receiver screens, which again were netting them some positive yardages, maybe you get a 6 yard pickup and you're in a 2nd and 4, but then Guelph was good enough to then say, all right, but we're going to shut the door on the next one, or again, bend but don't break. Whereas against Waterloo, it was more of, and a guy I really want to see get going in this one is Chris Joseph, where it
Mhm.
felt like, this guy's like blazing fast, running these slant crossing routes as that outlet for O'Donohue when that pressure's coming, replace the at the linebacker spot, and this guy's going east-west with a guy trailing him and then being able to find the gap. That was clearly more effective. And again, kind of like the commentary with York, where this is a team in U of T with a new offensive coordinator and some new pieces, a rookie quarterback, and all these things where you're still building and still kind of part of this long-term plan that you're putting together. So maybe we'll see a blend of that. But you know what? A game right now in McMaster where you have both these clubs, you know, like sitting at Mac obviously with the 0-2 and U of T with the close 1-1 with that win in Waterloo. And this is a game where we're looking at, this is one where we're coming back to perhaps in week 9 of saying like, man, oh man, the outcome of that game rippled all the way down here. So predominantly, as you already highlighted, aggressive back defense, Drake Bodie's your Carter Blads, obviously Chimbalanga, what we've seen him do. We know what our guy and Josh Cumber's going to do. And on the front end, some of those guys they have getting after it. I'm curious to see how Coach Canisius, having shown kind of two different approaches to attacking an aggressive defense, is going into Scott Brady's house. Let's flip the script now. So we already talked about, again, as we mentioned on the review pod, the tale of two halves, Mac at Queens. And man, oh man, did that Mac offense come alive. And in large part, it was spurred on by how that Mac defense was finally starting to stifle them. Queens, that is. But, we talked about some of the texts that you and I had back and forth. And I'll certainly come clean and admit that when we saw James Priestner was in this game, I think there was a text I sent you being like, wait a minute, what if Mac just blows the top off of Queens in this one? And obviously that didn't come to fruition. They certainly looked a little more frisky in the second half. Keegan Hall, another really nice game for him on the whole there. But a passing attack for them and a guy in Braden Kelly who's going to be facing a rushing defense that certainly doesn't compare to what he had to go up against in Queens. Probably
Mhm.
not even, no, definitely not what he had to go up against Laurier as well. This is a game for Mac. And again, U of T's defense put them in their place and then some the last time these two teams did battle. But I think this is an opportunity for Mac after, a competitive game against Laurier week 1, where, you lose, but you show some things. The offensive line seems to have picked up all these things, the rushing games there, whatever, all these things. Then kind of a bit of a mixed bag in Kingston, where ultimately I think this is going to be a competitive game. But man, oh man, do I think it's important for Mac, and this isn't a shot at U of T, I just think it's possible for them to say, let's stick it to them. Like I talked about the little get back, the lot of get back that my Guelph Griffins want to do to get against Laurier. I mean, Mac's certainly thinking the same thing with these guys. And again, with James Priester, with the Jackson 2, as you dubbed them, right? With Braden Kelly having shown some positive things so far for this team. I think I'm forgetting one other guy in that receiving core as well. That's embarrassing. I'll come back to it later, perhaps. And of course, our guy, I know, sorry, I shouldn't say our guy. He's your guy in Keegan Hall. That's
Mm.
I can't claim any type of ownership there. But an offense where, though I think it'll be a competitive game, a really important moment where Nicholas Adair, a really important moment for them to be able to say, no, 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 this is what we are capable of. Don't believe me, just watch.
How poetic it would be for this McMaster offense in particular to find their rhythm and to really start flexing their muscles against a team in U of T that, first off, they have not beaten since the pandemic. Since 2020, they have not beaten them. They've only played twice, but they haven't beaten them either time. And certainly from last year, with how the offense did not perform. The amount of interceptions that were thrown, the pick six that was there, the whole reason that U of T was the number one in interceptions for the entire year was I think they got 5 in that game against Mac alone, setting up that defense consistently in bad scenarios. Once, and the most egregious form of this that we detailed obviously last year, but just to bring it up, just to really make sure that Mac has enough ammunition to get fired up for this game. Keegan throws an interception. The ball carrier, I can't remember who it was. I believe it was Ryan Stewart. He gets tackled on the 1 yard line. The McMaster defense goes out there and stuffs the U of T offense 3 times in a row to get the turnover. The very next play, Keegan Hall throws a pick six. That's where a lot of the conversations of, we were talking about, hey, there could be some inter-team turmoil here happening.
Mm.
That was a big part of where that timeline or where that conversation started. You throw all of that out the window. You come out of here and you show that first half against Laurier and the second half against Queens. We're going to put both of those together against this U of T squad. Let's show the entire OUA what we're capable of doing here. Let's come together as a team, get the first dub of the season, and finally get on the right track that we know that we can. I think that that's what this McMaster team really needs to be focusing on. You've shown flashes of it on both sides, on offensively and defensively. You've shown flashes of the greatness that you're capable of. Do it. Just do it now.
I go back to that game as you were talking about, and I realized that, perhaps some of that turmoil was again spurred on by some quotes by some bald guy on a podcast saying that you probably would have won the ball if you just handed it off. But again, I think you're right. Much like we talked about with Waterloo being pissed. And again, as we're getting into the season and tensions start to get flaring up and everything like that, I think this team has all the ability in the world to put it together. And again, I think it's a team where we're seeing offensively some changes, of course, with that offense and everything, but it still revolves. It still all starts with Keegan Hall. And, I hate to say it, we're creeping towards that midway point of the season where, not that it necessarily matters to any of these young men, but where we're going to start talking about, okay, halfway through the season, who are the top performers? What's your top 3 quarterbacks? What's your top 3 running backs? And as of right now, depending on how you define Guelph's quarterback situation, because maybe it's a situation when the two of those guys cannibalize one another, Keegan's knocking on the door, but he's not there yet. And again, whether it doesn't matter a lick what we think about it, if our assessment's at least fair that he's playing like a top 3 quarterback with this defense, that really changes the dynamics of what this team is capable of. And again, I think with so many things in life, seeing is believing. And I'm certain the folks in that locker room at McMaster believe in what they see, no doubt, week in, week out in practice. As you mentioned, first half at Laurier, second half at Queens, they know it's there. But it's that proverbial monkey on the back where until you do it, until you say, look, that's a good U of T team that has had our number twice in some really embarrassing ways. And we took care of business and we hung a 40 burger on them and we sent them packing back down the QEW. I think that has to be the mentality. I think it's a little tighter than that, and maybe it's in part because I already took an underdog on the road, but it's in part with that I think in what I do think is a tight game, Mac ends up with this game at home and they start to right the ship with, of course, the At the 55 Bowl lingering in the distance. Because if they drop this one at home and they have to go into Guelph, and if made that much more intense, where if Guelph picks up the upset on the road against Laurier, man, oh man, I'm already so excited to talk about the preview for week 4 when we're doing it at Guelph. I would just love the opportunity to do so if it's in a situation where Guelph's coming off a win and Mac is coming off a loss at home. I'm not predicting that to happen in this one. I think they take care of business. I think that offense really has a first quarter to fourth quarter outing that again starts to make some people go, okay, they're finally doing the thing that they've shown that potential of. And that's I think where I'm standing on this one.
I'm in lockstep with you once again. I'm picking McMaster to win this one. I really think that we're going to see some really great things from McMaster in this game. I think that not even when I say we were going to see some great things, I don't mean it's because U of T is going to do some bad things. I just think that McMaster's finally going to start putting things together, and we're starting to see what a top tier offense they have the capabilities to be, and what a top tier defense they have the capabilities to be, and see what that looks like when it really comes together. I want to see both sides of the ball with McMaster operate at the highest level of what they're capable of doing. I think it's time. And certainly, if we're once again talking about the At the 55 Bowl that's coming up in the very next week, you need to have some positive momentum if you had any hope of upsetting those Guelph Griffins in the Royal City. So start this week. Start getting back to form. Start getting back to where we really think that this McMaster team should be. At least I do. Get there. Use this. Get there. That's all that I'm saying.
And with that, that wraps up our preview for week 3. And if you couldn't piece it together yourself, of course, that leaves the Windsor Lancers on the bye week, which, hey, after, it kind of an interesting counter to what you were saying about when the bye week needs to happen and whatnot. I think after an emotional win like that on the road, I think the bye week can be a good thing to say, all right, let's enjoy that one a little bit longer. Let's take a beat. Let's get back into action for week 4. Again, if you missed it, me and Tom are going to be in the house in Waterloo for the Laurier Guelph game. We're going to then head our way to Hamilton to check out U of T, take on McMaster in the evening showcase. A great weekend of football. Again, Tom, as you were just mentioning, the At the 55 Bowl is happening. It's going down in week 4 that we'll certainly be talking more about. You'll see some posts from us on social media. Again, on that point, please follow on all avenues at the 55 Podcast, Instagram, X, Twitter. I think we have a TikTok, but I don't even know what TikTok is really. And again, if you're listening on Spotify, if you could drop a rating, share it with a friend. Again, thank you so much to everyone for the tremendous feedback week in, week out. Shout out to you folks in the Kingston area, Nancy and Jerry Lorimer, for the lovely email you sent to us. It means the world to us with all that feedback. So we'll see you in Waterloo. We'll see you in McMaster. And if we don't, you'll see us talking about all these games right here at the 55.